That's what gets me out of the bed in the mornings, is to be able to see that vision become a reality. It's great to be here with you. I think the last time that I was in this sanctuary, you all and several churches in the area were discerning whether or not you were going to make ECO your denominational home. And you and I believe all those others who were there that night have made that step. And so you joined 400 other churches and church plants across the nation who are a part of this movement. And so it's great to be able to be back. I love being able to be worshiping with people and being able to be a part of the church. And John and I have tried to work a time for me to come for quite a while. It started at the beginning of 2020. And then obviously we've had to put that off for a great deal of time for a variety of reasons. And the main one obviously being COVID. So it's great to be back here. This is only the second time I've preached outside of my normal area in which I live, and so it's great to do that. I love to be able to go out and to preach and to be part of events and see what's going on in the life of the congregation. And it's fun to see things, as John prayed, beginning to open back up and people coming together, people feel comfortable returning to church, people being vaccinated, and so it's exciting to see all of that. And at the same time, there's a little bit that I sense from our churches of anxiety about the future. There's some major questions that churches have been trying to ask even before COVID. Where are we going in our culture as we move from a less Christocentric culture, what we would call Christendom, where the church is at the center of cultures? We move further and further away from that. What does that mean for the church in the future? And in the midst of this last year, those questions have gotten even bigger and even more challenging. Who's going to come back? How are we going to reach the next generation? What does it mean to have digital and virtual church? And how do we not fall into consumerism and hold out the centrality of the call of Jesus in our lives and in the church? All these questions are digging within us, and I would say that it is causing some level of anxiety within our churches and within our pastors. And so what I want to do this morning is to preach from a passage, Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39. And this is a passage that I think will give us encouragement and hope and remind us of the great and amazing power of Jesus Christ to work in us and through us for his glory in the world. And so hear the word of the Lord in Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39. Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, and he fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him, and he was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles. But he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to enter these. And so he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man, entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled, and they told it in the city and in the country. And then the people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus, and they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. And so he got into the boat and returned. Then the man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. As we walk through this passage, what I want to do is pull out 4 surprises. 4 things that I think the disciples were probably surprised about in the midst of this story. And 4 things, quite frankly, even as we know Jesus and we know who Jesus is and what he does, they might actually be surprising to us. But each one of these surprises is going to exemplify the power and the love that Jesus has for us and the ability to work through even unconventional people. And so here's the first surprise. The first surprise is that Jesus went to the other side. Now, we didn't read it, but in verse 22, Jesus says to the disciples, let's go to the other side. Now, that sounds like a basic enough question, right? Like, hey, let's go out to dinner or let's go out to lunch after church. I mean, right, pre-COVID, those would be normal kind of questions that we might ask each other. And so Jesus says, hey, why don't we go out to the other side? Sounds like a basic question. But the question probably produced a lot of anxiety and fear into the disciples, and here's why. So here's a map, if we've got the next slide, of the Sea of Galilee, and you can see that it is really more of a lake than a sea. Now, on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, that's where the Jewish people lived. That's where Jesus' disciples were from. Jesus did most of his ministry in Galilee, and he did it primarily on 95 to 97% of his recorded ministry is on that western part of the Sea of Galilee where the Jewish people lived. But on that eastern part, that's where the pagans lived. That's where the people who worshiped all kinds of false gods lived. That's where people who were engaged in all kinds of immoral practices lived. We might say that's where, quote, those people lived. You know what I mean by those people, right? We all have them, let's be honest. They don't look like us. They don't act like us. They don't dress like us. They don't have the same socioeconomic background or education that we do. And oftentimes, if we are honest, we try to spend our time avoiding those people. We see them in the grocery store in aisle 2, we go to aisle 9. Okay? But here's the thing. Jesus intentionally calls the disciples to go to the other side. To go to the places and the people for whom it would be uncomfortable. And the reality is that Jesus calls us to go to the other side too, doesn't he? So where is that other side for you? Maybe it is on the other side of Stockton. I don't know where like the tracks are and what would be considered the other side, but maybe there's that location that is the other side. Maybe it is at your places of work or social events that you are a part of, that there's those people there. Maybe it's actually in your own neighborhood. You know the phrase, right? Good fences make what? Good neighbors. Okay, maybe it's the mask muffling, but I heard you. Thank you. Good fences make good neighbors. What if that's not true? What if God has actually placed you in your neighborhood because he wants you to love your neighbor as yourself? I think I read that somewhere, right? What if God has intentionally placed you in your neighborhood to love the people around you? You know what I think is one of the worst inventions is the electric garage door opener. Because at least before that, you had to get out of your car to open the garage. And now you can just drive up, you can push a button, the garage goes up, the car goes in, the garage goes down, and you never have to know your neighbors. But what if God has intentionally placed you in your community? Because there's people that need to know Jesus. And Jesus is calling you to be a light in that particular area, and yet we can spend so much time going in and coming out and not loving the people around us. So who's on that other side? Who's on that other side? Who's on the other side for the church? Now here's the second surprise, is that Jesus only has one positive interaction as he goes to the other side. So Jesus gets in the boat with the disciples in verse 22. Again, we didn't read that part, but the storm occurs, and that's where Jesus calms the storm. So now the disciples get to the other side. They already don't want to go on this journey, and now they're seasick, And then they see this demon-possessed man as soon as they come to shore. And did you pick up on what he was wearing? Nothing. He was naked. So the first thing to see is this naked, demon-possessed man coming toward them. What do the disciples have to be thinking? I told you. I told you this is a bad idea. Man, this is worse than Mama even warned me about. And so they see this man coming. Jesus has an interaction. He casts the demons out to a herd of pigs. They jump off the cliff and commit swinicide, right? Ha. And he's clothed. He gets some clothes and he's in his right mind, and Jesus is talking to him. And the people come back. They're probably mad that their pigs were killed, but the thing says they were afraid. And they asked Jesus to leave. Now here's what I'm surprised about, that Jesus leaves. I would have thought Jesus would have found a way to stay. He would have sweet-talked his way around. Behind this event is a group of cities called the Decapolis, 10 very powerful, important cities. And I would have thought for Jesus to go all that way across the Sea of Galilee, he would have wanted more time there. It just doesn't seem very efficient to me to go all the way across the Sea of Galilee to minister to that one guy and come back. But what does that say about Jesus? That it was worth it. It was worth it for him to travel all the way across the Sea of Galilee to reach that one guy. That one guy who wasn't going to be a major donor to Jesus' ministry, right? A guy who was bound and shackled and thrown into a cave, and we can't wait for him to die. Jesus says it's worth it for me to come all the way across the Sea of Galilee to reach you. Praise be to God. Because if we're honest, we're that same guy. We may act more socially appropriate than he did, but we are in just as much need of the love and grace and mercy and forgiveness and healing that this guy was. And so I don't know where you are in your own walk with faith. Maybe you've been a Christian a long time, you've been going to church a long time, but I know for me, as long as I've been a believer, when I hear songs and sing songs like Reckless Love and just reminded of that great and amazing love that Jesus had for me, it's a helpful reminder as I go about doing the Christian life. And maybe you're just checking it out. Maybe you're checking out online or you're checking out here and things have happened in your life and God is just moving in such a way. I so deeply want you to know and to talk to John, to talk to some of the other people here about this great and amazing love that Jesus had not just across the Sea of Galilee for you, but across the cosmos for you. The scripture says that we celebrate in Easter that Jesus, though he was in the form of God and he dwelled in heaven with God, he didn't regard his equality with God as something he should use to exploit other people, but instead he emptied himself by becoming like us and becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. I hope and pray that you know that amazing love that broke through everything in order to call each one of us to be his children. Now here's the third thing that's a surprise, is that Jesus leaves this unlikely person to be the only witness. So Jesus does this ministry, heals the man. The people are afraid. They ask Jesus to leave. I'm surprised that Jesus leaves, but he does. He gets in the boat, and the man who had been possessed with demons comes to him and says, "Could you take me with you?" Boy, I don't blame him, right? I mean, could you take me with you? Because last time I was here, they would bind me and throw me into a cave, and I'm afraid they're going to do that again. And I would have thought Jesus would have said, "Sure. Come on, there's room. Come on in." This guy isn't ready to minister. I mean, he's got no Jewish background. He doesn't understand where Jesus has come from. He's just had 1,000 demons cast out of him. Do you think he has any residual issues? Absolutely. I would have thought Jesus would have said, "You know what, come with me, and eventually maybe like you can be an usher after a couple of years." But here's what Jesus says, "No, I want you to stay And I want you to declare all around what God has done for you. Really, Jesus? That's your plan? The whole eastern side has not heard of your love, and you're going to put this guy in charge? And Jesus says, yes. Because it's going to illustrate something that we see all throughout Scripture, which is that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Let me say that again, slightly different. God doesn't call the equipped. He's not saying, hey, who has the best resume, who has the most degrees, who knows enough that I can delegate ministry to and not have to worry about them. No, instead, Jesus says, hey, who will go? Who will be faithful? Who will do what I call them to do? And when they do that, if they do that, I will be with them. I will equip them. I will empower them. And so when great things happen, it will be obvious that it's God at work and not me. And so God calls this guy. And if God can use him, then God can use you. See, I don't know you, but I know that most likely you have less issues than that guy. Now, John will tell me who I'm wrong about, but like 99% of you have less issues than that guy. And so why do we use all the excuses to just sit on the pew of Christianity? I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have enough bad stuff in my background to be able to relate. I have too much bad stuff in my background for God to use me. So we use any and every competing excuse of why God can't use me. But when we see that God uses and calls this guy, then God can use and call us. And he's doing it. And so here's the fourth surprise. It's my favorite. It's the cultural transformation that occurs because of this one witness. So Jesus and the disciples, they're back in the boat. They're going home. I wish I could have been a fly on the side of that boat to hear the conversations, because the disciples are very happy to get out of there. They're very happy to go home and saying, oh, thank goodness, right, that we're never going to have to go back there again. But Jesus does go back. And it's recorded in Mark chapter 8 that Jesus goes back. It actually says he disguises himself. And he goes back and heals an individual. And like this time, there's a bunch of crowds that come around him. But this time, they're not afraid. This time, they're actually hearing that Jesus is back, and they become excited to hear about what Jesus wants to say and do. So much so that the next event that happens is the feeding of the 4,000 men plus women and children. So the feeding of the 5,000 happens on that western side. The feeding of the 4,000 happens on that eastern side. So do you see the difference? Jesus goes, he does a miracle, people are afraid, they kick him out. Jesus goes, does a miracle, they come together and they're hungry for what Jesus has to say and do, and he's got a mega church within hours. How does that happen? How does the culture go from being so afraid and anti-Jesus to begging to come to his word, and even if they don't have their food and provisions? So I think it has to be because of that one guy. Because that one guy was faithful to do what God called him to do, and he went and he told everybody what God had done for him. And he didn't have to have all the answers. He didn't have to have a Bible degree. He didn't have to know everything. All he had to do was to be faithful to share what God had done for him. And the culture transformed. Can God do that again? Yeah, okay. I don't know if that was a mask. I saw one or two heads nodding. The answer is yes. God can and wants to do that again. But here's the question. Will we be willing to go to the other side for him? See, in a lot of churches have missions programs. And they give money to other people to do ministry on their behalf. And I absolutely think we should do that. I'm excited you have a missionary coming next week. Absolutely. Be generous with that love offering and help that mission. But don't just think we pay other people to do ministry on our behalf so that we don't have to. No, God is calling you to the other side. Maybe the other side of the city. Maybe the other side of the events. Maybe the other side of the fence. And so the question is, will you go? And I know that God can and wants to put on each one of your hearts people around you that don't know him. You may not even know their names. But you see them across the street or whatever it may be. And the question is, will you go? And I think when we do, when we're like that child that blows the dandelion into the wind and God scatters us to do his good work in the world, we will see great things come about for his kingdom. Will you pray with me?